This narrative chronicles the life of George Weslie Richardson, including key events from his life, as well as details about his wife, Pauline Isabella Butler Richardson, and their children. Much of the story is based on a biography written by his daughter, Pauline Richardson Ballif, with additional contributions from other family members and friends. The story is presented as though recounted by one of his children. George Weslie Richardson, Wes, was born on the 14th of April, 1899 in Benjamin, Utah, to Thomas Richardson and Eunice Letty Hickman. He was the seventh child of 9 children. His older siblings were Thomas Leslie, Shadrach Milton, David Othello, Sterling, Genevieve, and Lucy Ann. The children younger than him are Alton H. or Alt, and Eunice Letty. He lived his entire life in this small Utah County town called Benjamin. It was a farming community. Glenn Davis, a lifelong friend of Dad's, spoke at his funeral and described their childhood. He said that there were 35 boys within a mile that played together. We have also heard the number as 22. He and Dad were 2 of them. Glenn lived across the street and down a short distance from Thomas and Eunice's home. Grandpa and Grandma's home was originally the Benjamin West School. Glenn said that wherever he and Wes were at lunchtime, that mother would feed them. I'm sure there was a lot of work for them at their own homes, but it is fun to think of little barefoot boys having time to also climb haystacks, swim in ditches and ponds, and catch wild critters. In the summers, the street resounded with whooping and hollering as the boys and girls played. They didn't have to worry about automobiles or gravel on their bare feet. One day, Wes came home with a skunk in his arms. Grandma buried his clothes in the straw stack, and he was scrubbed in a tin tub out in the yard in cold water. We're not sure what happened to the clothes or the skunk. One day at school, Dad got into the bell tower attic area of the schoolhouse. He was up there playing, and we were told his legs went through the floor of the bell tower. You could see his legs sticking out of the ceiling in the room just below. There is no mention of how they removed young Wes from the floor of the attic. There was one day that Dad noticed a young lady named Pauline Butler. She had pretty long blonde braided hair and blue eyes. Pauline was visiting friends in Benjamin for a week and came to school with Clara Dudley. After 2 or 3 days, Clara told Pauline that she had a boyfriend. Mom recounts her meeting, courtship, and marriage in a 1973 interview with Don and Thelma Butler. In this recording, you will hear how Dad pulled Mom's long braided hair during a movie. They started dating, and almost every night Dad and his friend Jack Zeman serenaded Mom as they passed by her home on horseback. On October 5, 1920, Wes married Pauline Isabella Butler. Wes was 20, and Pauline was 19 years old. The reception was held at the church, and a large group of friends decided to chivalry them. Let's listen in on Mom's story told in her own words.
You've told me about told us about some of your early boyfriends, but when did Wes come into your life? Where?
The prime.
Yeah.
I had a trip down to Benjamin before we moved down there. I went down there for a whole week once.
Who did you stay with? This is from Rains?
I stayed with Dad Evans's family down there.
Oh.
And I just stayed down that week and I went over to see Mabel at the same time. We went to Provo and saw Mabel, and then I went over to Spanish Fork, and they met me there, and I rode in a wagon 6 miles down to Benjamin. But I went to school and with Clara Dudley, and after 2 or 3 days, she come to me and she said, Pauline, you've got a boyfriend in town. And I said, no, I don't think I have. I've never met anybody. And she says, oh, there's that great big kid up that street there that sure wants to meet you. And I don't think I'd ever even seen him. And I didn't see him. Then we moved down there, of course. In just a year or two, we moved to Benjamin. When the strike was on, they made us all move from Rains, and we moved to Benjamin. Did you move to Manti at that time?
That's when you went to Manti.
And we moved down to Benjamin, and we had to leave Thelma and Bill and Paul and Bill, and Boyd was on the way. I went down to Benjamin, and they had a little show there, and I went to the show with the rest of the kids, you know, and I met Wes at this show. In fact, he pulled my hair all night. That shit. Did you have long hair then?
Your hair was long then.
Yeah, I had a long braid. So every night when he passed the house, he used to serenade me. He and Jack Zeman had passed, and they would sing to the top of their voice, and they got a big kick out of singing. And I started going out with him, but we always had to take Lucy, his sister, with us in the buggy because she didn't have a way to go to the dances either. That's
Yeah, her own.
Dancing, right?
Oh, everybody was doing it then.
Again.
Everybody was doing it by that time. We graduated. Well, you know, this was so different. It's just like the rag developed into the two-step and the one-step.
Yeah.
That was just the first walking together. Now, you know, you used to waltz way out here. Now, my mother said her father would never allow her to waltz. That was terrible. She had a square dance. But the rag was just the beginning of the one-step and the two-step. That was just learning. All you did was walk together. I think you took 4 steps this way and 4 steps this way.
How about those shoulders?
Yeah, the show.
Oh, wait, he moved those right from music.
Oh, we had fun.
But we didn't dance with one fellow. We danced with everybody in the hall.
Didn't you do the Charleston?
Well, that was Elaine's day when I wasn't that fast. I couldn't do that Charleston. Well, Elaine could do it.
You can do it.
I never was active enough to do that. I couldn't do Charleston very good. We did the meditation dance, I think they called it.
We're right close to when you and Wes got married.
Yeah, we got married, and they the night we got married, they all at once took Wes and
After the
ran off with him during the reception. And they sent me home with somebody else, with Jack Bingham. And they took Wes off and they took him off to the West Mountain and turned him loose. He had to walk home.
Dad and Mom lived with Mom's parents that first year. Donna was born there. They spent the next 2 winters in Mammoth working for a mining company. Dad and Mom enjoyed their winters in Mammoth, even though it was very cold. Betty was born there the second year. They would return to the farm for the planting and harvesting. They then bought the home just south of Grandma and Grandpa Richardson. Dad became a trusted worker in the mine. The owners liked Dad. He was a good employee and quickly learned the job. They were going to move their mining operation to South America and wanted Dad to join them. He was anxious to go. He talked it over with his parents. Thomas, his father, was not very well. His mother encouraged him to stay. His father just said, "Stay on the farm, and when I die, it will be yours." Dad's father, Thomas, had a stroke in the summer of 1923 and died the 21st of October, 1923. Wes was 24 and was not the oldest son at home, but his older brother, Sterling, had suffered with asthma from childhood and was not strong enough to handle the farm. His brother, Alt, was 19. The 2 of them had to take over the farm. Genevieve married the next year. There were 2 families to feed, Grandma, Sterling, Alt, and Eunice, as well as Dad and Mom's family. Dad and Alt ran the farm together for 23 years until Grandma Eunice passed away. The promise that the farm would be Wes and Alt's did not happen. On July 6, 1925, Tom was born. He was their 3rd child and first boy in the family. As time went by, Paul was born, and then Pauline. Later, Mom had a stillborn baby boy, born sometime in 1929. Dad and Mom showed this tiny baby to Donna and Betty when they were 5 or 6 years old. They remember him as being fully formed. When Donna asked as a child, "What happened to the baby?" Dad told her that the doctor had taken him. We could find no record of him, so we have relied on the memory of Donna and Betty and what Mom told us. With this recent information, we have added him to our family. We now have 12 children in the family. Dr. Stewart delivered some of the Richardson children. I don't know if there were other doctors that delivered any of the other children. Pat was born the 24th of April, 1930. Stan was born the 22nd of April, 1932. I believe that was when they decided the home was just too small. There were 6 children, and Mom and Dad in the 2-room house. The family then moved to the Matley house. It was a mile east of the corner where the church is now. That corner had a store on the southeast corner, a service station on the northeast corner, a school on southwest, and a church on the northwest corner. This was the real center of town. Pauline was born on the 25th of September, 1933. Sterling was born the 7th of September, 1935. Lynn was born the 2nd of January, 1938. All three were born at the Matley house. My brother Tom said it was hard those few years at the Matley house because it was 2 miles from the farm. So to go home for lunch by horse, it took about 2 hours. They often had lunch at Grandma's. Dad decided to add on to the house. A kitchen, bedroom, and a bathroom were added, and the large existing bedroom was divided into 2 rooms. There were now 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a space for the bathroom. We did not have a tub or toilet. We had to bathe in a tin tub those early years and use an outhouse in the backyard. It was a 2-seater. We moved back into the house about 1939, 7 years later. We had water in the kitchen sink. The bathroom was finished 7 years later in about 1946, 7 years later. We also got a refrigerator that was really great. Dad had been able to get an extra job at Geneva or Ironton, so there was a little more money to purchase a refrigerator. Larry was born the 25th of September, 1940. On December 31st, 1942, Michael Brent was born. He was the only child in the family to be born in the hospital. We almost lost our mother in that birth, and the doctor was paid in loads of hay. For Pauline, it was 4 loads of hay, Lynn 5 loads, and Larry 8 loads of hay. The doctor raised horses, so the hay was a bargain. The farm produced barley, grain, hay, corn, peas, sugar beets, alfalfa seed, and wheat. Many of these crops required irrigation, which involved maintaining ditches, adjusting dams, and ensuring water reached the end of the fields. Watering was often done at night, as water rights were scheduled according to each farm's turn after the preceding farm finished. The farm had 2 chicken coops, and they also raised pigs, cows, and sheep. The sheep temporarily on the West Mountain. A typical harvest workday included moving 4 loads of hay in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. The physical labor caused Dad to have a heavy perspiration marking around his waist on his striped coveralls. They used horses for plowing, harrowing, planting, and harvesting. In addition to using horse-drawn farm equipment, Dad competed in horse-pulling matches in which he won several of them. A blacksmith shop behind the house, along with basic tools like a shovel, pitchfork, axe, and hoe, helped maintain the farm equipment. Dad possessed exceptional skill in articulating the concerns of townsfolk to both the Water Board and the County Projects Committee. Over a decade, he served diligently on the Utah County Road Supervisors Board. Active in politics, he devoted considerable effort to the Democratic Party. Additionally, he held the role of vice president on the Utah County Sugar Beet Committee, traveling across Utah and Idaho for the organization. His involvement extended to the Public Marketing Administration of Utah County. Dad briefly served as Utah County tax assessor and also worked at Ironton Steel Company. Dad was successful in his efforts during the Depression to help get men back to work. He submitted a plan to the county for a road project that would create a road around the West Mountain. To be accepted by the committee, the plan had to be one that would require little money except for the workers' pay. His plan incorporated the shell from the shores of Utah Lake to be used as a road base. The plan was accepted and Dad was one of the foremen. That project made possible the road which now exists around the West Mountain. This project was considered a WPA project to get men back to work after the Depression. The men who had been searching for work were so glad to have jobs. Dad was a good foreman. He watched over the men and they became friends. When it was time for lunch, the men would scatter. He recognized there was a problem. The men who scattered had nothing in their lunch pails to eat. From then on, until they had started to receive a paycheck, Mom filled a lunch bucket with sandwiches that Dad would hand out as he walked around talking to the men at lunchtime. There were several farmers, including Dad, who kept herds of sheep around the West Mountain. Getting to those farms became much easier when the road was finished. Dogs that ran loose were a major problem. Dad lost his herd of sheep in one night. The dogs would get into the corral pen and run after the sheep. The sheep would run until they died. It was a major loss. Additionally, coyotes were another problem, but they would just take one sheep to eat. It was some distance from our home, so it was hard to be there all the time. What a shock it must have been for Dad and the other farmers to see their loss. Times were really hard for the family. We had food because of the farm. Our family had grown. There were 8 children by 1935, and there just wasn't enough money. Dad was asked to serve on the school board, so the story goes, and had gone home to talk it over with Mom, and then decided he would go discuss it with his older brother Leslie. Somehow Les thought they had sent Dad to ask him to be on the school board. He accepted, and Dad let it go. Dad knew a quick way to stop the hiccups. All he had to say was, "I talked to your teacher today," and as kids, we would quickly start confessing everything we might have done, and then realized our hiccups were gone. We all knew Dad would back the teacher, so we had to be good students. In December of 1941, America joined World War II. We watched the young boys leave for the war, and then again our lives changed. Food stamps, war bonds, gas rationing, 1 pair of shoes each year, sugar was rationed. Candy all but disappeared from the shelves. Everything was being used for the soldiers. During this time, one of the children lost their shoes. It was all that Mother could do to plead for a replacement pair. After the war, the Richardson family started to marry. Paul was released from the military in San Diego. Loa Carson had waited faithfully for him, and they were married the 7th of November, 1946. Donna married Clem C. Fulmer, who had served in the Pacific during the war. They married on the 5th of September, 1947. Betty married Frederick Wayne Galloway, the 4th of December, 1946. He had been a fighter pilot and had flown many missions in the Pacific. Tom married Gloria Dixon, the 29th of June, 1949. He remained with Pan American Airways. Grandma Eunice Richardson died on the 3rd of September, 1946. That brought many changes. The property which Dad and Uncle Alt had run for 23 years was now to be divided between each of the 7 brothers and sisters of Grandma and Grandpa. We don't know if there was a will, but an early promise to Wes and Alt was not kept. The farm consisted of approximately 70 acres in Grandma's house. Dad and Alt mortgaged the 70 acres to pay off the other brothers and sisters for their part of the inheritance. Dad and Alt split both the loan and the land into 2 35-acre farms. Dad began smoking cigarettes as a teenager, which often kept him out of church activities. He promised each of us children that if we didn't take up smoking before they were 21, he would give us a wristwatch, which was a big deal then. He knew the addictiveness of early smoking and could not stop himself. Donna, Betty, Tom, and Paul received their watches. Pat was 21 before Dad died, but he was too ill to complete his promise. Dad and Mom were always supporters of church activities. Dad served as the superintendent of the Sunday school for 2 years. He was also called to be the elders' quorum president. He tried to quit smoking, but as we all know, tobacco is very addicting. He just couldn't do it. He told the leaders that they should call someone else. Mom and Dad were called to the Old Folks Committee. They put on great parties for senior citizens for 25 years and loved it. So did the senior citizens. When we were growing up, they sent us to church, but only attended when there was a baby to bless or a baptism. I suppose for Mom, it was difficult because she was either pregnant or had a little child to care for at home. When the home teachers came, we all listened to the discussions. Dad was knowledgeable about the church, and we were taught to live by its standards. He liked to bring up gospel topics at the kitchen table to get us thinking. Tom remembered seeing Dad read the Bible in the Book of Mormon. After Dad's death, Mom and Dad were sealed in the Salt Lake Temple on the 9th of August, 1956. Dad loved hunting and fishing with friends and family. Everything they had to eat was either raised in a garden or grown on fruit trees in their yard. The meat was either shot hunting in the hills or raised on their farm. Dad was a good hunter and enjoyed hunting with family and friends. He hunted deer, elk, and pheasants. In the fall, there was always the pheasant hunt. Our brother Paul once said that if Dad took 2 shots, then 2 pheasants fell. For years, the pheasant hunt was a big gathering of friends and family at our home. Dad hunted in Strawberry Valley, Scipio, Nebo, and up at Uncle Ray McKenzie's ranch in Diamond Fork. He loved to fish at Utah Lake, but I don't think we ate the fish. Dad also enjoyed time reading different books in the newspaper. I didn't remember any big lectures on how we were to behave. Dad corrected us with a look to show his disapproval. We were never to talk back to Mom. That was a given. I think it all went with what was expected of us at home. Discipline was usually without anger. Dad would just lift his right eyebrow and look at the troublemakers, and that would stop what was happening. At the dinner table, if things got out of hand, he would get up and leave the table. Then Mom would say, "You kids have done it now." Then no one would feel like eating. Greg Fulmer shared a story that Grandma Pauline shared with him years ago. The kids were getting rowdy in the home, and Grandma was asking the kids to settle down. They were not listening to Grandma, and finally Grandma in despair said, "Wes." Grandpa lowered his newspaper and said, "Listen to your mother," and everyone stopped. Grandpa went back to reading his newspaper. Dad wasn't shy about giving spankings when needed. Some of them would make the seat of your pants sparkle a little. He would usually use the palm of his hand, but sometimes a green willow would do the job. Nobody seemed to think that what they got was not deserved. There was no question that Dad still loved you. If the girls complained about doing the dishes, Dad would take the dish towels from us and tell us to go sit down. That would bring a flood of tears and a very quick apology. Gossiping was not allowed. When we were on a telephone party line, we were not allowed to listen to other people's conversations. Here are some of the stories we have heard from the family. One year, someone got into the food cellar and had stolen all the food from it. Grandpa's only words were, "I hope they needed the food more than we did." Aunt Pat remembers coming home after a date, and she and her date were parked in the driveway at the house. It was getting late, so Dad would come out on the porch and stand there. Aunt Pat would see him and say to her date, "There's my dad, I better get in." Sometimes the brakes on the car weren't working properly. Dad would just say, "If the brakes don't work, just drive the car into the field to stop." Mom and Grandma Miles were traveling back from Springville to Benjamin one day. The steering wheel of the car came off, and the car went down into a ditch and stopped. Grandma Miles started getting worked up and saying things like she might have a heart attack. Grandma Richardson turned to her and said, "We don't have time for this. Grab your coat, we're going to walk." Another time, Mom was driving home and drove the car into the fence that surrounded the house in Benjamin. Mom told Tom and Paul that if the fence wasn't fixed before their father got home, there would be no dinner. Dad and Mom would take the kids to the dances. Dad would always have the first dance with Mom. When it was time to go home, Dad would save his last dances for his daughters. That's how we knew it was time to go home. Mom and Dad were good parents. We were taught honesty, integrity, and love by them. I remember one saying that has always impressed me. If you can't say anything good about someone, don't say anything at all. Dad was 5 feet 9 inches tall, 205 pounds. He had dark hair, brown eyes, and heavy dark eyebrows. He was a handsome and personable man. He was strong and a hard worker. Dad and Mom shared with neighbors and friends, a sack of flour, meat, or vegetables from the garden, and always a helping hand to those in need. In about 1948, several of us remember standing at the window in the living room and watching an entire pea crop being destroyed by a hailstorm that lasted no more than 10 minutes. It also took the tops off the beets and flattened the grain. The 3 cash crops were gone. These were worth $2,000 or $3,000. We were all heartsick, but as children we had no idea what that meant to Mom and Dad. Dad plowed the whole field of peas under the next morning. Not a word was spoken by Mom or Dad. For Pat, it meant her tuition for Henniger's that fall. She can't remember how much, but hers was only small compared to what Mom and Dad had planned for its use. Pat says Tom paid for her tuition. Tom had gone to Wake Island and had left an account at the bank in Spanish Fork. He just opened it to Mom and Dad. Tom wouldn't put a dollar amount on that. Most of us were recipients from one of our older brothers or sisters who helped us out in a time of need. Dad, before he passed away, would get up early to make the fire. Dad would sing as he worked. Some of his favorite songs were "When It's Springtime in the Rockies," "Old Shep," "Oh How I'll Miss You Tonight," and "Tumbling Tumbleweeds." He would also sing to the children, "Come Sit Upon My Knee, Sonny Boy," and "Red Sails in the Sunset." Later, these songs were on the radio as we woke up to the same kind of music. One of the children remembered Dad and Mom singing while they drove down the road with us children in the car. And several of us remember riding on the work horses with our legs spread out because the horses' backs were so wide. When the horses were being harnessed, we had to be careful not to be stepped on. Dad loved those big old horses. He would enter contests to show whose horses were the strongest. They would be harnessed to heavy objects, and Dad and his horses won a lot of the time. I think these contests were held on homecoming days. I believe Dad was in charge of quite a few of those celebrations. When Pat left to go to school in Salt Lake, I was not allowed to work in the fields because there were no other girl cousins, and Dad was very careful with his girls. I then became Mom's right-hand person. After Dad's death, when Grandma Miles lived with Mom and the boys, she and Mom would can beans, tomatoes, peaches, pears, corn, peas, red beets, and cucumbers. The cellar was full and ready for use until the next harvest. Larry says it for all of us. Our mother was an awesome lady. Dad's early death placed great responsibility on Mom, and she didn't complain, she just did it. We can all learn from her example. Before we had a bathroom and water in the house, which was about 1946, the water for the washing was heated on the kitchen stove. The clothes were hung out on the clothesline to dry. In winter, I remember bringing them in frozen and hung on lines in the house in order to finish drying. We all helped, but in the house and on the farm, it was still Mom and Dad who carried the load. Our meals were always meat, potatoes, vegetables, and bread. Mom baked bread twice a week. I think it was 6 loaves. Dessert when sugar was available. Betty loved to cook the dessert. There were never leftovers and no picky eaters. We ate whatever was prepared. The large meal was at lunchtime during the summer when the work was so intensive. Dad's favorite meal in the evening was bread and milk. He also enjoyed eating sliced raw onions. Mom received the money as the eggs were delivered. I remember there were 2 coops, but I don't know how many chickens. Cleaning the chicken coops was a smelly task. Dad would tell the boys on Sunday morning, "I am going to clean the coops. You can either stay and help me or go to church." I think Stan did a lot of coop cleaning. Here is a handwritten letter from Mom and a short note at the end of the 4-page letter to Donna and Clem shortly after Greg was born. Dad wrote, "Well, Donna and Clem, I guess by now you have gotten back down to earth. I know how happy you are. It is a joy that lasts forever and keeps on adding to more with a few heartaches. We all join in your happiness. I always am proud when one of mine thinks enough of their heritage to add to it. Our wishes are all for health and happiness. Dad." Selling milk was another quick cash item. Everything else on the farm brought in money at harvest time. The girls never milked the cows. That was another job for the boys. I don't know how many cows we had, but the milkmen came daily, I believe, to pick up the cans of milk to be taken to be pasteurized. Dad was seeing local doctors, and they recommended him to go to a doctor in Salt Lake. Mom couldn't believe that he was that bad. She took him up there in Ogden. He was there for a week. He came home just before Christmas. This was around 1951. The doctor had told him if he didn't stop smoking, it would kill him. He stopped smoking, but his lungs had already been affected. And he had lung cancer in both lungs. In the fall, he was sent to a tuberculosis hospital in Ogden. In December, he came home. He wasn't well, and I remember he watched us decorate the Christmas tree. Tears were streaming down his face. He continued a downward trail with his health. Pauline came home from school after the first quarter. Even though she had worked at the photo studio on campus for 65 cents an hour, the money just kept her in the apartment. There wasn't enough to pay tuition. That first quarter gave her the incentive to return and graduate a few years later. Dad's health continued to get worse. Paul had gone to a mortuary school in Cleveland and was now working as a mortician for Deseret Mortuary. Mom had arranged for a doctor appointment in Salt Lake, and Paul brought a hearse down to transport Dad. Levon Payne had come to help get him into the hearse. I remember Dad saying to him in a concerned voice, "Take care of my boys." There were 4 boys at home. Sterling, 16, Lynn, 14, Larry, 12, and Brent, 10. When Dad returned home, the doctor had placed a tracheotomy in his throat so he could breathe more easily. We knew he could not last long. I don't know when we were really told that he had cancer. I shared the last moments of Dad's life. Uncle Les and Aunt Hazel were there that night that Dad passed. Mom said, "I just can't watch this. He is in so much pain." So we knelt down to the side of his bed that night. The younger kids and Pauline were there. Mom prayed for him, for the Lord to take him, and that it was time for him to go. About 20 minutes later, he was gone. Dad passed away at the age of 53 on May 7, 1952 at 3:15 a.m. in the morning. Funeral services were conducted by Bishop Parley Lundell on Saturday at 2 p.m. in the Benjamin LDS Ward Chapel. Friends could call at the Valley Mortuary in Payson, Utah on Thursday after 4 p.m., at the family residence in Benjamin on Friday after 5 p.m., and again on Saturday prior to the services. Just one final thought. Dad was a man who cherished his wife and family deeply. Despite the challenges of this time, he always sought to give and support others. As a family, we have inherited a wealth of virtues from him and Mom: integrity, generosity, even in times of need, unwavering support for family, hard work, honesty, community leadership, service, and compassion for the less fortunate. As a family, we are thankful for the profound legacy that has shaped each of us. The story doesn't end here. May we honor Dad and Mom by embodying these values and virtues so that their legacy continues. Oh, one last story. Not only had we lost Dad this month, but the weather had been so rainy and the water table so high that we couldn't plant any crops. This was a great concern for all the farmers in the area, as it meant the loss of several crops. One morning, those of us at home began to hear rumbling down the road as several farm neighbors pulled into our yard with all their equipment to prepare and plant our crops. I don't know how much equipment there was, but there were more than 40 men. They went to work as we watched. It makes me cry even today to remember that great service to us when their farms also needed to be planted. That gift of service and kindness saved the farm. The legacy continues.